Queiroz, com patrocínio de Secretaria de Turismo do Estado do Ceará, apoio de Casa Azul Ventures, Elephant Coworking, Federação das Câmaras de Comércio Exterior, Instituto Brasil-África, Junta Comercial do Ceará, Mango Ventures, Observatório France, Trends CE, Vetor Marcas e Patentes, Winds for Future, apoio institucional de Apex Brasil, Fé Comércio Ceará e Complexo do PECEM, apoio tecnológico de Mob Telecom e Project TI, TAPE, organização de Prática Eventos e Move On, Media Partner, Grupo O Povo de Comunicação.
Welcome back to Ceará Global 2020, the first day of our activities. And now we have a panel, Digital Connection for the Atlantic. A great connection with the panel we just had about the clusters. And so our special guests that will talk to you now, Antônio Nunes, CEO from Angola Cables, Paulo Cunha, from Amazon Web Services, Ricardo Liebman from Iracema Digital. And the questions can be sent by WhatsApp. 996302. The moderator, Adalberto, Pessoa. My dear Adalberto, take it away. Excellent work. Good morning, everyone. It's a great satisfaction to be part of this panel that definitely will bring about many reflections, great reflections about our state, the state of Ceará. I would like to thank all those that are present virtually, who's going to deal with infrastructure, basic infrastructure, the state of Ceará is really the corner to the Atlantic and serves as digital connection for Brazil and for the rest of the world. We have in the state of Ceará a set of underwater cables reaching the city of Fortaleza, 14 underwater cables, and also land stations, data centers, interconnection points that generate a very favorable ecosystem for businesses and services that the state of Ceará can provide to Brazil and the rest of the world. In this panel, we have three very relevant speakers that definitely will contribute extensively to enrich all of these ideas. First, I would like to pass the floor to my partner, Antônio Nunes, CEO from Angola Cables. Angola Cables, who has made many investments in the state of Ceará and infrastructure with cables, land stations, and data centers. For your first considerations, all the best. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to thank all for the invitation to be here with all of my colleagues. And once again, thank you for your participation in the forum. And so, I'm sure that many of you know Angola Cables from Angola, obviously. It's a multinational company. We have operations throughout the world, but we're from Angola originally, and the development of underwater cables to Africa and the rest of Brazil. So links to Brazil, Latin America, and North America, and Africa. So it's to interconnect emerging countries with the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, more distributed internet from north to south, and digital transformation to emerging countries, both African and South African. So linking the western coast of Africa and South America, directly linking to Brazil, and another cable linking United States to have connectivity and this distribution throughout the Atlantic. So the construction of Tier 3 data center in Fortaleza, because Fortaleza could start having the necessary infrastructure to add value to all of the underwater cables, even according to what Adalberto mentioned. So infrastructure conditions in Ceará, so that the state of Ceará could become a digital reference, if you will. All right, now I would like to go on to our friend Ricardo Libra, businessman here in the state of Ceará, and also president of Iracema Digital. It's a great pleasure to talk to you, Ricardo. Fortunately, he's on mute. Ricardo's on mute, unfortunately. We cannot hear him. Well, we wait for Ricardo. Okay, I think I got it now. Okay, so just to repeat, pleasure to be here with all of you. Alberto. And so, contributing the economy of Ceará, and now the state government with this very important project to give life to the digital belt, as it's called here in Ceará. Anyway, we have to, work with all of these brains that perhaps are leaving Ceará and sometimes don't come back. And so we're talking about the construction of the basis for this diaspora, if you will. So I'd like to greet Mr. Nunes from Angola Cables. And he showed us the dreams of Angola Cables at the time that became plans, and these plans rolled out even more than he had promised at the time. So now I'm president of the Titan Institute, but I'd like to greet Paulo Cunha, country manager for AWS in Brazil, especially for government, who takes care of the Amazon program, especially to foster startups with the use of digital technologies for education. I think education is a major problem in Brazil, but it's also a major opportunity. So investments so Ceará can transform. And so it's a great pleasure, really, to be here. And our mission is to collaborate in this articulation, innovation through digital technology that impacts all sectors, the government, economies, people's lives. And so I'm very, very happy to be amongst you gentlemen participating in this debate. Yeah, that's great, Ricardo. Lastly, we pass the floor to Paulo Cunha. Paulo Cunha. my friend for more than 30 years now. Let's not say more than 30 years because people will know our age, but anyway, we've known each other for a long time. Information and communication technology, and it's a great pleasure, really, to count on your presence here, Paulo. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. As a company, you know, I try to contribute with the success of Ceará. I'm very happy with this panel, Antônio Nunes, and great satisfaction of meeting the pioneers. So we have a very strong ecosystem already in Ceará, and the idea is to continue looking at Ceará, the relevance of Ceará. So thank you very much. Okay, so now let's kick off our chat, our reflection, our exchange of ideas. It's something that's part of my daily routine, the digital belt, if you will. This whole infrastructure that has more than 14,000 kilometers of fiber optic cables going through 184 municipalities, and having innovative projects, video monitoring solutions with cameras and public security that we have today in 42 cities in the state of Ceará. All of this generated in the last 4 or 5 years, since 2015, a major revolution that I call the silent revolution, really. In these last few years, more than 500 small new businesses in the state of Ceará to provide internet access. That comes from this network that's been comprised, and after was given over to 3 companies, Mob and Wirelink, to use fiber optics from the digital belt. These 500 companies generates more than 4,000 direct jobs and more than 1 billion reais a year in the economy in Ceará. And so really, it's an asset, a relevant asset in our state. And also, the digital belt structure in this moment of the pandemic, even with all of the increase in demand, with video streaming and increase in e-commerce, so that traffic and broadband consumption increased more than 200% in the last 6 months. So anyway, this structure, together with the structure that we have, communications hub, data communications hub, Brazil and the world, with these 14 underwater cables that we have in the city of Fortaleza, with another 4 cables that will arrive until the end of 2021. So a total of 18 cables. So the state of Ceará has a privileged location in telecom. And it's in this sense that I wanted to pass this question on to you guys. I mean, how do you see the state of Ceará in terms of telecommunications, and how the state of Ceará could be an element for digital transformation, be it here for the state or for other states or Brazil as a whole, or perhaps other countries? I mean, how do you see the structure of the state of Ceará in telecom and the capacity to digitally transform? Yeah, I would like to say that in terms of Angola Cables has seen in Ceará as its port, a safe port. And that's why we made so many investments $300 million. The whole process of the underwater cables and data centers. And like I said, for us, it was a very serious bet. But we did what was our vision, to install ourselves in Fortaleza. And so what we have is the necessary infrastructure so that the digital systems could transform and increase, always from an external point of view. In other words, today, Fortaleza has the conditions, has the means to be the Brazilian hub for external communications. Of course, the Brazilian market is very strong in the south. But in terms of capacity for international connections, there's no doubt that Ceará is better than all of these other points, because through Fortaleza, Brazil has direct connectivity to Africa, indirect connectivity to Europe without having to go through North America, and indirect connectivity. But anyway, great for Brazilian communications, the underwater cables that connect Brazil to the rest of the world. Now, with the data center that we've already certified as Tier 3, the Enganap data center, Fortaleza today has all the conditions based on this digital belt. So actually, I would like to congratulate the government agencies and from Fortaleza and from Ceará for having such a broad vision, not only Fortaleza as a city, but the entire state of Ceará through the digital belt. And so at this moment, the infrastructure for development, everything is ready and growing. So we see this growing demand is taking place. Of course, on our side, the side of our company, we would like this to grow in a more accelerated fashion because investments are done. And so we want to have a return on our investment that's been done. But definitely, we have seen a progressive increase in digital consumption in the region. So things have been well structured. Yeah, for sure, Nunes. Ricardo, well, we have 3 hubs today. The digital hub, the digital belt. We have the digital hub. Without the digital hub, we could not have more development in the countryside, in the hinterland. The fact that this digital belt is everywhere, and we saw this in the pandemic. There is a beach very far away where we could install, there were 2 broadband providers, fiber optics, connected to the digital belt. In a very distant beach, we were able to install, and many other friends, Tassilo Pequeno was there. We all had access to broadband internet, and we saw the workers, all of the students having access, broadband access, because those that were there, had access, even the poorest of the poor, and had a lot more access to broadband. So the digital belt is very important. But the state of Ceará, we have 2 other hubs, the port hub and the air hub, that are precious strategic advantages for Ceará. But of course, we have to do our homework, okay, to take advantage of all of this because of economic development, social development of the entire state. We cannot only convey data through the port or people or tourists through the airport, through our international airport. I mean, we need to produce things, and our link to the port is extremely important in this sense. It's very strategic. So flow of merchandise, the flow of goods, and we need to become an important corridor for import and exports. The Air Hub, a partnership with Fraport from Germany, from Frankfurt, that just delivered another expansion. And we need flows of tourists and merchandise. So we have the hotel chain. We have excellent restaurants. So anyway, we have Beach Park, which is one of the main international attractions, one of the most important water parks in Latin America. We have a different culture. We have the sea, the sun, and the wind. More than 500 kilometers of coastline, and kite surf schools, people from everywhere coming to Brazil, coming to Ceará to take advantage of the summer, 360 days a year. And so, a tourism hub. I would even say that we could have a fourth hub that has everything to do with the data centers. We have two major companies that provide wind power. We have two of the largest renewable energy companies, and data centers consume a lot of energy, and they can install themselves here and even generate their own power. So anyway, there's a lot that we can do with these four hubs. In the data hub, Angola Cables exemplifies, connects us with these three cables that arrive in Fortaleza, connects us with Africa. We used to be Africa, and we're similar. We have a history with Africa. And this is an example. So, Amazon is here installing their data centers as well. So, just like the port hub and the air hub, we need to strengthen our ecosystem in Ceará. We need to generate and deal with data, produce software, produce cloud solutions hosted on these local data centers, cultural goods and digital goods, cultural industry, rich cultural industry. So we need really to make this data available to the world. It'd be useless for us just to provide data communication, that we don't download data or create more data. So in our case, the data hub, it's very important that you foster a strong industry in all of Ceará, and that ETICE, through the digital belt, can share this culture. Of course, we have training for specialized labor, and we need to think Ceará as a whole. Of course, the vision of Angola Cables is the vision of all of you. But anyway, Iracema Digital, we're in this struggle to collaborate, articulate with information and communication technologies. And what we were talking about 2 years ago, it's easier to defend now because COVID has expedited this digital transformation. And so that's our role, to collaborate in the articulation. So many things that are happening in Ceará so that we can take advantage of these hubs that we already have. Perfect. Paco, we know when we talk about ICT services, telecom is the basic part. I mean, it's what gives the necessary infrastructure for things to happen. The same way that data center infrastructure. How do you see the scenario of the state of Ceará as a potential supplier of services geared towards the digital transformation of the state and other clients, other states, and other countries? Digital transformation that everyone is going through. I mean, you work more in the public sector. How do you see state policies? Yeah, thank you. Excellent.
Muito pertinente pelo momento que nós estamos vivendo.
The state of Ceará,
o Ceará ele tem uma característica única e isso tem uma liderança não só no Brasil, mas na América Latina. Há mais de 4 anos, o Ceará tomou uma decisão, o governo do Ceará tomou uma decisão de uma política chamada Cloud First. Essa política significa
all new
que
projetos
e projetos de renovação deveriam, em primeiro lugar, olhar cloud computing sob a gestão da ETICE. Isso é único. Nós não temos ainda no Brasil inteiro, passado 3, 4 anos, um estado que tenha uma política semelhante. Eu diria que o segundo foi o governo federal brasileiro, através da Instrução Normativa 01. O que significa isso no final do dia? Se nós olharmos o Ceará com a sua infraestrutura de telecomunicações e essa política da esquina do Atlântico, que eu gostei muito, onde você consegue conectar as Américas, África e triangular o resto do mundo, isso dá para o Ceará já uma posição estratégica. Com a decisão de ter a propriedade de uma rede de fibras e fazer o outsourcing da operação dela e gerar um ecossistema de 500 provedores de menor porte, mas atendendo ao que nós chamamos de última milha, faz a vontade de qualquer estado brasileiro um dia ter. Eu desconheço ainda uma densidade populacional com acesso à fibra tão alta quanto nós temos no Ceará.
Now let's bring these two things together. If you have a government vision that directly impacts citizens, a typical example, the alliance with the ETICE and apps for tracing for COVID. A classic example where you can see the distribution with an area of communications. Examples like Ricardo has mentioned, even places that are further away. And a third element that I like to share, the educational hub. We can't forget the concentration that you have today in Fortaleza of an excellent educational hub. I mean, public universities and multinational companies that work with education, and even groups in Ceará, where there's already a company in NASDAQ showing that there is the capacity, not only talents for digital transformation, but also the capacity to export these services. Ceará is very advantageous, especially during the pandemic, I mean, we've already talked about communications, being pioneer, and leaderships in public policies. And the third, now the capacity to add educational framework and exporting these services within the country and other countries in Latin America. In my opinion, this is a very correct vision. Not limiting the country, but bearing in mind the movement that we have today, and that remote work is extremely acceptable. In some occasions, we don't even have another alternative. Taking advantage of the development of this workforce that's special America in digital transformation could be Fortaleza. And my challenge is this: we can accelerate more programs for specialists in cloud computing, and that's what the market needs. And so we have many spots available in Brazil, and they're not going to decrease. I mean, we need people. We need more people. So this is our vocation in Ceará, and you can count on us at Amazon Web Service for that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, to contribute a little bit with what we just heard. And really, it's a reality. It's true. An example of what Angola Cables has done with Speed Up Brazil. We created a partnership with Brazilian scientists in the fight against COVID-19, and we created a software program with Brazilian scientists and Angolan machine learning scientists and identification of COVID-19. And the software is ready. At this moment, it's being tested to identify those with COVID-19 with an X-ray. This X-ray with machine learning is able to identify very quickly if the individual is contaminated or not, and the level of contamination. And so what we're doing with scientists in Ceará and Angolan scientists is going to serve for the fight against COVID in Brazil. And we need to apply this in Angola. And now we're going to have a presentation of this in South Africa to take advantage of these digital bridges, if you will, to transform and improve people's lives. Yes, for sure. Nunes, it's important to mention that in terms of telecom and internal infrastructure for data communication, the state of Ceará, it's very important to mention what we just heard. The state of Ceará was the first to take the helm, if you will, in terms of cloud-first policy, and in the public sector, that usually is more reactive than proactive. And so, now talking a little bit about business, Nunes, how is Angola Cables? How is this relationship between Angola Cables and the private sector, business in Ceará and outside of Ceará, be it in the private sector or the public sector? How do you see the pandemic had an influence in the sense, positively or negatively? I mean, how do you see this scenario in terms of business for Angola Cables? Well, the pandemic, there's two faces to the same coin. I mean, has forced a lot. We had a huge growth for digital demand, and so in Brazil, the demand that we had threefold, and so our traffic in Brazil 3 times. And this is representative. I mean, we have a greater demand in the use of broadband. But the fact that companies are still adapting to this new situation, for example, we have this event that's extremely interesting, very innovative. Because quite often our ways of selling were in trade shows, we're very social, where that's where business flowed. And so the fact that we're going through this moment, we're going through a transformation, if you will, things are slower. They go slowly because companies also have many doubts. What will be the future? I mean, if this demand will maintain, and so they're afraid to buy something that perhaps later it's not going to really be what they need. So there are the pros and the cons, but in terms of digitalization, I would say that at this moment, undoubtedly, is the future. You know, what we say that companies need to go digital. Optimization of cloud would bring about many advantages for different types of work. Today, it's a reality. I mean, kids are studying from home. Many companies are working also from remote work. And that's why apps are becoming better and better. And we naturally are following the demands of the market. So to supply cloud services, cloud-based services for our clients, and what they need in terms of their needs and their future needs. What do I mean with all of that? For example, today, you know, accountants. And so companies are giving over their balance sheets and their activities to accountants through the cloud. And they go to the cloud to seek this information that they need. They present the results. And so we see naturally this happening. And that makes us very satisfied that what we've bet in the data centers in Ceará and connectivity in different regions, I mean, you know, in order to link different Brazilian demands to Ceará and Ceará to the rest of the world. Yeah, that's great, Nunes. I would like to go back a little bit what we heard about education through investments that have been done publicly and privately. I mean, we have today excellent results related to performance of students, be it students from the public school system or from the private school system. We have a system of federal schools, the second largest in the country. So we have different research institutes in the state of Ceará. We have Fiocruz in Eusébio with health tech. And I would like to connect all of this to this issue of infrastructure, that we know technology without people is a body without a soul, basically. And I'd like to ask Ricardo to try and figure out what would be the competitive advantages that the state of Ceará has in this scenario, national scenario. This great digital connection, the digital hub that we have today in operations in Ceará. Excellent. That's a great challenge, actually. The state of Ceará has these virtues great public schools, the best in Brazil, basically. Excellent distribution, some great private schools as well, because they're just amazing, really. We have excellent results in many of our municipalities. So anyway, access, very well distributed access, like you mentioned, Adalberto, 100 so many schools that are state schools with labs distributed in the entire territory. I mean, there's basically a public school of the state everywhere, an environment where people can study. There are many labs and a network of more than 30 federal institutes and universities, excellent universities, Quixadá, UFC, more than 40 doctors in Quixadá. And so, you know, working for international organizations, we have many municipalities, labs, resources from Embrapi. So anyway, we can build software in Ceará, and students from Aracati and so
Isso, então, nós temos uma capacidade de desenvolver muito grande, nós temos muita criatividade, nós temos, então, essa acessibilidade,
access to education, and this is really a competitive advantage, you know, when you think about it. Connections, a teaching system. We're very careful with education in the state, and Secretary of Education. And so this brings about excellent competitiveness, and we hope to take advantage of this. The digital belt allows, you know, for more than 500 internet service providers in the last mile, and so that we can deliver great quality education to all, even to try and reduce social inequalities, because when you have a public school that's basically at the same level as private schools, of course, some private schools have better conditions because their students have more access to information, you know, trips and culture, etc. But through education for the poor that usually you have in public schools, we can grow quickly, training labor in the entire state, and working for Ceará and the rest of the world. So we have cases, like I said, people working for Silicon Valley. We have projects in Aracati made by companies in South Africa. So today, we can use this infrastructure that we have in Ceará, you know, education and the digital belt and connectivity and underwater cables. We can grow quickly. Software as a service, a platform as a service. And so it's all truly amazing. And so we're thinking, solutions to take information communication technologies to everyone. And so we need to act in a coordinated manner so we can accelerate this process. State government and municipal governments need to be very active. I mean, they need to really foster this way of transforming Ceará. And so we're quite aware of this. The government understands, companies understand this, and so we're prepared. And we have the privilege of acting quickly to this new demand from society, 4G, the digital era. We're prepared for this. Companies are aware. We're also transforming. These are getting ready. So I think, we're at a moment where we need to coordinate in order to expedite this whole process. But we have a huge competitive advantage, as we've heard here so much before. Right. Lastly, one last question before we accept some questions from the audience. I'd like to ask Paco from AWS, how do you currently see the existing infrastructure in the state of Ceará, in terms of data centers, and AWS as a world leader in cloud computing services? How do you see Ceará in this scenario? I mean, could we really be this Brazilian Seattle? I think I heard this from the director of AWS, who was here in the state of Ceará last year, I think. Paco. Yeah, thank you. I think the ecosystem that we discussed now, collaboration Antônio, Nunes, and Liebman, is exceptional because it's a snapshot of infrastructure investor, somebody who is an economic activist.
E ao mesmo tempo nós que somos fornecedor de tecnologia e temos o interesse de investimento no desenvolvimento da força, da mão de obra especializada do Ceará. Quando você une essas três forças,
this alignment, the government and the capacity to articulate and to promote, the conditions are all here. The question is, can this moment of the pandemic and expedite this process, accelerate the process? I would say, Adalberto, yes, we should expedite this whole process because of the conditions that we have in the market, and at the same time open to this kind of dialogue. Today, if we were to map the country, what we know, and we don't have the capacity to have a national observatory, a complete observatory, but what we see, these conditions are very well represented in Ceará. There is political alignment. There are investors, and so it's a growing market. Now, labor, that's an essential element, and that needs to accelerate. And you can count on us, AWS, our educational programs, so that we can disseminate this and be an active collaborator in this process that's been going on for 4 years now. But there's this important window of acceleration for us. Yeah, great, Paco. Amazing. Now, yeah, perhaps something controversial, but I would like to challenge a little bit, because as we've discussed until now, the state of Ceará has all the necessary conditions to be a pseudo Silicon Valley of Brazil, because the infrastructure is created. There is political will, apparently, And for sure, the private sector needs to be more active. I mean, what we see, investors in infrastructure, is that the whole movement is somewhat slow. I mean, take advantage of the fact of the situation of the pandemic to accelerate the digital processes in Ceará. The cables are there, the infrastructure is there, the data centers are created. So it's very important to have the digital potential. But then sometimes people just leave. And so the challenge here is exactly we need to think of the maximum potential to use as much as we can of what's already created. And from my point of view, this is all slow. You know what I mean? Many of these things are created, but it's been very slow. And we need to accelerate this and see Ceará to take advantage of what's already been created. Yeah, I'd like to add, Adalberto, something if you allow me to. Sure, but very quickly, because our time is basically up. I have two questions here from the audience. Yeah, in Iracema Digital, we noticed this. We see that we're not very visible. We know each other very well. We're not very visible. We don't have a showcase, if you will, for Brazil and for the rest of the world. But like the digital ports, like many other states, so we want to help with this articulation, and really we believe that we need to be quicker. We need to get to know each other and integrate more, and an acceleration process. Okay, I mean, you can't just let things happen. Yeah, so opening up for questions now. I received a question from Karini for Nunes. And the question is, how is digital growth at the moment in Angola? So, how can the state of Ceará generate more business for the African continent with this digital hub that we have here? Well, thank you for that question. And when Angola Cables developed its infrastructure, always taking into consideration that Africa is the second largest populated continent, also a continent that has many young people. And that means that, bearing in mind that new professions in 30 years will be a new paradigm. I mean, in 30 years, most professions that today are relevant won't be that relevant in the future. And so Africa has a potential of creating a new legacy, if you will, for to be the continent of the next generation. And so there's no doubt and Ceará is a reference that's incredibly positive. All the development that Africa needs to have. I usually say, in Angola, that we could use Ceará as a lab, if you will. Analysis of what we have to do well within our institutions. So the digital belt, in direct coordination with the government of Ceará, and to capitalize on the opportunities of all the institutions in the state, and for accelerated government relationship, it's very advantageous so that the state can grow. So, looking at an African country, it's a very, very interesting model to be followed. And so one of our ideas is to use Brazil as a reference so that we can have examples how you can create this development in a more accelerated way. I mean, some time ago, about a month ago, we had a webinar with Brazilian scientists from agribusiness.
E com elementos das telecomunicações da TIM também já têm algo relacionado à agroindústria.
And
com produtores
with Angolan
exatamente
growers, so that we can understand what is Brazil doing with digital agriculture. I mean, gains in yields and efficiency using information systems, because since we have to create a new agriculture, new farms, in order to have more local sustainability. So it's great to learn with countries like Brazil that have been doing this, that have this know-how and have a lot of this technology quite mature. And so to take advantage of these digital bridges, to have a foot in Brazil and a foot in Africa, and to capitalize this situation. Now, we're trying to increase and improve all of these processes through these digital bridges, as it were. Angola, of course, has grown slowly, but we see our government also concerned with digitalization. That's right. One last question, and then we get into the closing remarks for each one of you. This question is somewhat of a provocation, if you will, sent by Eric, and it's really more for Pacu, with the data communications infrastructure, everything related to existing data centers here in Ceará, like Angola Cables. That's already a tier 3 data center. How does WS see this participation in the state of Ceará, offering services with less latency, with lower latency for the Northeast region? Like Nunes mentioned, even Africa. I mean, how do you see this? That would help us to stand out, to be different. Thank you for the question. That's an excellent question, actually. It has everything to do with this discussion. Despite the pandemic, global investments haven't stopped, okay? We have 24 regions today. Each region, you have at least 2 data centers. We have 3 different ones, what we call availability zones, and connecting all of them in one single network. So we have a global network, and we use different services and third-party companies that help us in this communication. Now, from a practical standpoint, the company continues with its own research roadmap. Investments for Brazil, more than 1 billion reais. And at the same time, we continue investigating the best points where we can be present. So Brazil is a priority for us. Of course, we continue with our research processes, and from time to time, we announce our next steps for regional investments. So therefore, we continue with looking at the region. Thank you. Okay, Pacu. I know there's time for everything, and we've been talking a lot. We know there are different actions that the state of Ceará has been undertaking. I'd like to thank our speakers. I'm sure that the state of Ceará has this infrastructure where we can have digital transformation domestically, but also for our external clients. So we defined strategically some time ago migration to the cloud, this internal structure with our digital belt. There's the data communications hub between Brazil and the rest of the world with 18 underwater cables until 2021 connecting Fortaleza. And so we have a whole network of education, talents, a moment where new emerging technologies are taking place, cloud, big data, AI, blockchain. I think, I believe it can and should be the focus for many. You know, what Ricardo Lima mentioned so well, to come up with solutions, coming up with solutions, that means more business. So I'd like to pass the floor to each and every one of you for your closing remarks. Well, I'd like to thank for the invitation. I think this is a very useful debate, a very interesting debate. And the fact that we need to create digital bridges, the exchange of information, exchange of know-how, so we can evolve in a more sustainable manner in the Southern Hemisphere. And so one of the main goals of Angola Cables is to distribute internet in the Southern Hemisphere in a more sustainable way. And that's why the creation of these infrastructures, and in order to create and add value to African countries and Brazil. So thank you for the participation. We're totally available here to continue talking to you. Yeah, thank you. It's very gratifying to talk to the three of you. It's very interesting for me, and I think, you know, we were able to take this great message. Thank you, Adalberto, Liebman, Antônio, Nunes. So basically, it's a great summary of the last 5 years, major efforts from the state of Ceará to bring digital transformation to a public agenda. So congratulations, and of course, thinking about all the provocations, all of the ideas, and how we can collaborate more with the state. Thank you very much for remembering us.
abraço a todos. Foi prazer. Mais uma vez,
So a special thank you to our audience, everybody who is virtually here with us in this panel. Thank you very much. All the best. And now we're back to the studios of Ceará Global 2020. We'd like to thank our participants in this last panel, and we will be signing off now.
Ricardo Liebman, que é o nosso mediador, Adalberto Pessoa. Obrigado a vocês por essa.
So thank you very much for this wonderful panel. Very important for us as a great panel. And now we're going to take a break. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back later. So see you soon. And please check out the virtual city. We'll be back later on. Continue connected. Ceará Global is on.